The empirical incommensurability of psychology and neurology. These days, the supposition that mental states are just brain states or processes is common sense to many. The belief that the mind is an aspect of the brain, or even that the mind is the same thing as the brain, isn't an arbitrary shot in the dark. All sorts of experiments have demonstrated that changes in mental states occur in tandem with changes in brain states, and unfortunately, mental disabilities tend to follow brain damage. Indeed, science fiction has become science fact now that so-called mind-reading devices are commercially available. The stent electrode recording array, or Strenode, is a notable example. It enables paralyzed people to interface with computers by detecting activity in its user's motor cortex from its position inside a nearby blood vessel. It's basically a computer input device that plugs into the same outlet that muscles are plugged into, cutting out the middleman. Devices such as these aren't just called neuronal action potential readers, they're called mind readers because users think about where to move the mouse, what to click on, and what to type, and sure enough, the Strenode reacts to signals issued from the brain that correspond with those intentions. In the wake of such astounding inventions, is there any reason at all to doubt that a more advanced device of such a kind could detect phenomena? Could the content of experiences be located somewhere in the brain? Not just figuratively, but literally? Might a neuroscientist point to a specific experience in your head the same way that a radiologist could point to a specific bone? Accomplishing this would require scientifically discovering states of the mind to be nothing but states of the brain. Has such a discovery been made? If not, then might one ever be? To answer these questions, let's first be clear about what it means to scientifically conclude something to be nothing but something else. To scientists, the term reduction expresses the idea that thing X reduces to thing Y just if thing X is constituted by thing Y and is nothing but it. This constitution might not only be material. To understand that a whole reduces to the sum of its parts is to understand how the properties of parts in relation to one another amount to the properties of the whole they constitute. Science has earned the right to regard diamonds to be nothing but carbon atoms arranged in a specific crystal structure because 1. When we examine diamonds under a high-powered microscope, that's all we see. There doesn't appear to be anything more or less to it. And 2, a theoretical model exists to explain how the properties of carbon atoms, so arranged, amount or give rise to the properties of the diamonds that they constitute. Only together do these facts entitle their knowers to consider diamonds to be nothing but carbon atoms. Anyone who merely knows one of these facts without knowing the other isn't so entitled. If you know that the properties of carbon atoms, arranged in a specific crystal structure, would amount to something with all the properties of a diamond without knowing that diamonds are in fact made of carbon atoms, so arranged, then your reduction will only be expressible in the hypothetical and almost trivially redundant conditional form: if diamonds consist of nothing but carbon atoms arranged like so, then diamonds are nothing but carbon atoms so arranged. And if not, then it's back to the drawing board. Who knows? The properties of diamonds may be realized by some other material constituents for all you might know, so a reduction isn't achieved when condition 2 is satisfied without condition 1. Likewise, a reduction isn't achieved when condition 1 is satisfied without condition 2. If we know that when we examine diamonds under a high-powered microscope, an arrangement of carbon atoms is all we see, but we don't know how such a structure could amount to the properties of diamonds, then we similarly lack the grounds to claim that diamonds are nothing but a specific configuration of carbon atoms. Philosophers of mind have struggled a great deal in coming to terms with this principle. If something about it seems less than intuitive, consider an exaggerated example. You would be surprised and confused if you opened up a computer and found nothing but a lot of chocolate pudding inside. And that confusion would rightfully dissuade you from declaring the computer or computation itself to be nothing but chocolate pudding. You would be humble enough to realize that you were missing something. Lacking an explanation of how the properties of chocolate pudding could amount to the properties of a computer means lacking a reductive theory from the latter to the former. Of course, computers aren't made of chocolate pudding. I only gave an extreme example to clarify the point. Still, it's easy to imagine a less hyperbolic scenario wherein a complete understanding of the sum of a thing's material constituents doesn't entail an understanding of its properties as a whole. Having a complete metallurgical description of a bar magnet, which is, materially speaking, nothing but iron, doesn't entail having an equally complete understanding of electrodynamics. You can correctly and completely describe the alignment of an iron bar's microcrystalline structure without so much as mentioning its resulting force, let alone explaining the causal connection between one and the other. And what a clumsy overstep it would be to presume magnetic fields to be nothing but metal simply because metal is the only thing we see when we try looking for them in bars of iron. And what a mistake upon a mistake it would be to claim that there can be no such thing as magnetic fields simply because no purely metallurgical description can bridge the theoretical gap between metallurgy and electrodynamics, and that all apparent demonstrations of magnetism that would suggest the contrary must therefore be illusory. And what a hilarious retreat it would be to claim that anything that can be used in the manner that ferromagnets are must itself be a ferromagnet. That a lead bar coated in rubber cement must have an identical magnetic field as an iron bar that adheres to a refrigerator door equally well. The overstep is the same that was made by the mind-brain identity theory of mind. The mistake upon a mistake is the same that was made by the eliminative materialist theory of mind, and the retreat is the same that was made by the functionalistic theory of mind. I could go on. It's quite rare that philosophers of mind don't make this mistake. The point is that most reductive theories of mind are marred by the collective failures of philosophers to recognize the importance of that second condition for reduction. Unfortunately, all such theories that do respect that condition stray too far into mysticism to be taken seriously outside of religious contexts. For instance, Berkeley and empiricism managed to bridge the theoretical gap between physics and mind by unifying both as mental activity in the mind of God. Berkeley's argument was valid, but critics considered this leap to be one out of an explanatory frying pan and into a fire. The metallurgical irreducibility of the electromagnetic force isn't a unique example of this explanatory incompatibility. It isn't at all difficult to think of plenty more mundane examples. Having a complete structural description of an airplane doesn't entail having an equally complete understanding of aerodynamics. The same airplane that can soar through the air can't achieve lift in a vacuum. Even if all the same turbines thrust and wings adjust at the same time and in the same way that they would have in an air-filled environment, the plane won't fly without air through which to do so. Having a complete physiological description of the eye doesn't entail having an equally complete understanding of optics. A fully functional pair of eyes won't see anything in a light-sealed room. I could go on, but I suspect I've made my point. So even a full account of all a thing's parts and how they interrelate isn't alone sufficient for a scientific reduction from a whole to those parts. The right to reduce a whole to its parts requires more than just making a list of all the parts of which a whole might consist. To say that one thing is nothing but another also requires specifying how the whole's properties consist of or result from the properties of its parts. There isn't any good reason to make an exception for the brain. Without an understanding of how the sum of a brain's parts amount to its properties as a whole, and in particular, its mysterious ability to change states in what seems maybe a perfect one-to-one accordance with mental states, we can't rule out the possibility that a complete and fully mature neuroscience will have as much to say about phenomenology as a mature understanding of metallurgy would of electrodynamics. And by the way, we do lack such understanding. Sorry to bear the bad news. Worse still, there's reason to suspect that achieving such an understanding may well be principally impossible, according to limitations demarcated by the methodological scope of natural science. The domain of natural science, that is, the physical world as scientifically characterized, is entirely defined by and conceptually limited to our means of observing and measuring the physical world. This is almost redundant to say, as science itself only consists of such means. The world as science portrays it can consist of nothing more than that which science can portray, nothing more than what can be systematically measured. Incidentally, our measurement-making practices aren't sensitive to experiential content. When you look inside a head, you don't see sensations, preferences, and ideas. You see irritated nervous tissue. You see third-person observable substances and not first-person experiences. And of course, that won't change according to the resolution at which you observe. Consequently, no scientific conception of the world can consist of such things as sensations, preferences, and ideas, whether they exist or not. In this light, the folk psychological intuition that the mind is something altogether beyond the physical world receives its justification, earning the right to claim that pain is nothing but the firing of C fibers, or the activity of any other neurophysiological structure will cost an explanation of how the properties of the former amount to those of the latter. If you don't know how the properties of C fiber firing or any other neurophysiological structure might amount to the property of pain, then you simply haven't earned the right to regard pain to be nothing more than that. You haven't paid your epistemic dues. To borrow a quote from Thomas Henry Huxley, how it is that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about as a result of irritating nervous tissue is just as unaccountable as the appearance of the jinn when Aladdin rubbed his lamp in the story. Of course, the empirical incommensurability of psychology and neurology doesn't justify a belief against the reality of either, as the idealists had for non-mentalistic physical properties, or the reductive physicalists at least claim to have for mental properties. Neither metallurgy nor electrodynamics can reduce states of metal to states of magnetic fields, or vice versa, because neither is identical to the other in part or at all, despite the perfect one-to-one correlation of changes shared between the two. Nevertheless, both metal and magnetic fields are equally real, and we've no reason to insist on a deep conflict between them. This is why the best neurology can hope to achieve for phenomenology is to discover parallels between the two fields, the so-called neural correlates of consciousness, and I'm sure it comes as no surprise that in attempting to do that, we'll find ourselves waist-deep in further theoretical issues all its own. I won't explore them or any others here, but if you're at all interested in that subject, I'll recommend David J. Chalmers' What is a Neural Correlate of Consciousness for further reading. Neurology hasn't achieved a reduction of states of consciousness to states of the brain because it hasn't described how the properties of the latter could amount to those of the former. Indeed, no scientific theory has ever described how any third person and kinetic things could amount to first person and experiential things at all. We know that brains relate to consciousness, but aren't yet sure how they do so. For all we know, the relationship shared between the two might not even be a reductive one. We don't even know enough to know that we don't know how third-person facts could amount to first-person ones because, for all anyone can honestly claim to know, they might not so amount at all. Not only do we presently find ourselves unable to bridge the theoretical gap between the world's first and third-person facts, but we don't even know what kind of gap there is yet to be bridged. The strenode only reads the mind to the degree that healthy muscles do. It doesn't do so by psychically encountering private first-person experiences, it only reacts to the brain's public third-person electrical output. Mind reader is a fitting name for these devices, as to read is to infer and interpret meaning from mere symbols.
Yeah,